Story 1: The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. My mother told me about an incident that happened to her when she was a little girl during the Great Depression, which started in 1929 and ended in 1939. During that time, factories shut down, farms and homes were lost to foreclosure, mills and mines were abandoned, and people went hungry. She remembered this one incident during this tragically historical moment all her life as though it happened yesterday. My great-grandmother lived with my mother and her family then. The town where they lived was mostly farmland, with a railroad running through the center of town. One day, a boyfriend of one of my mother's aunts, who happened to be a used car salesman, was feeling generous after a big sale and celebrated with a few drinks. He handed my great-grandmother a $20 bill and told her to spend it however she wanted. Excitedly, my great-grandmother decided to walk to a grocery store about a mile away to get treats for the family. In those days, $20 was like $2,000 to some people. My great-grandmother took my mother's hand, and they walked to the store together. At the store, two rough-looking men were loitering outside, but they didn't pay much attention to my great-grandmother or my mother. They got their few items, and when my great-grandmother handed the clerk the $20 bill, the two men peered inside and seemed to take notice of the change she was given. My mother and great-grandmother walked out of the store calmly and started home across the fields. It was getting dark by then, and they had only walked a little way down the road when my great-grandmother suddenly looked frightened. She turned around and saw a beat-up pickup truck with no headlights on following them. My great-grandmother grabbed my mother's hand, and they both started running. She pulled her into a cornfield and whispered for her to get down as low as she could and to move as quickly and quietly as possible. They both moved deeper into the cornfield. At one point, my great-grandmother whispered to my mother to lay down on the ground and not make a sound. My mother remembers seeing the light from a lantern or flashlight moving up and down, and hearing the rustling of corn stalks as the truck's drivers, who turned out to be the two men from outside the store, searched for them. After what seemed like hours to a little girl, my great-grandmother told my mother to get up, and they finished their journey home. In those days, newspapers and radio stations often reported people being assaulted and sometimes even killed for just a few dollars or pennies in their pockets. For many years, my mother would shudder and cross herself when she told this story, thinking about what might have happened to a little girl and her grandmother had those two men found them in that desolate cornfield. Story 2: My father's experience growing up in England. I've spent all night reading posts on this sub, and I have a bunch of stories I can share. This is the first one that came to mind, and I remember the first time my father told me this. It sent chills down my spine. Though we all live in the States now, my father grew up in northern England. Anyone who has spent time up there knows that, especially in cities like York, stories of hauntings are very common. The whole country feels like it's run by ghosts sometimes. My father was a kid when this took place, but my uncle, who is 5 years older, has also confirmed this story's validity. Not only are the cities haunted, but the variety of old cathedrals that are common all over the country seem to be epicenters for these haunts. My father and my uncle were visiting one of these behemoths, and for whatever reason, my grandparents were outside already while the two kids lagged behind. These cathedrals are usually well decorated and beautiful, so it's common to visit during off hours and spend time touring even when no one else is around. As my father was on his way out, all of a sudden, the boys heard a short tune played on the organ upstairs. In a building so large, the organs can be massive, so when they are played, it's impossible to miss. My father and uncle thought there was no one else in the building, so they curiously wandered up the spiral staircase to see who was there. As my uncle reached the top of the stairs, he turned toward the organ and went pale. He looked like he couldn't quite figure out what he was staring at. My dad peered over the balcony ledge to see what drew such a reaction from my uncle. Apparently, not only was there no one up there, but the organ was also locked up tight. Upon looking around further, they realized there wasn't even another way off the balcony other than the staircase they had come up. My father described feeling like a massive weight dropped into his stomach, and a sense of dread overcame him. Both kids tore out of that cathedral as fast as they could. I've asked my dad a ton of questions over the years about this incident to get as much context as I can. What he's told me is that even if there was another way off the balcony, the time between the organ playing and them reaching the top of the stairs was probably 20 seconds, not enough time for anyone to close the organ up and magically disappear. Hard to pull off, even for a ghost. I don't believe my dad ever went back there. If you guys want more ghost stories, I have others, some weird things I've experienced and really creepy ones I've been told over the years, mostly by my family. Thankfully, where we all live now appears relatively ghostless. Story 3, Spooky Weekend at a Friend's House. 5 months ago, some friends and I decided to spend the weekend at a friend's house in the mountains. We had 2 cars, with 3 people in each car. We were traveling for about 2 hours and had at least 1 more hour before we reached our destination. We were far from civilization. Our friend's house was in a very small mountain village. The only person living there was an old farmer with cows. Everyone else had moved out long ago because it was too far from the cities, where they had difficulty getting supplies or medical help. The road was especially hard to navigate during the winter. We were driving on this old highway around 10 p.m. You could only see the forest in front of you because of the car lights and nothing else. At some point, we saw our friend's car stopped on the side of the road. He was about 5 minutes ahead of us. We parked our car too and went to see what the problem was. Apparently, a large branch had appeared out of nowhere and hit the car from the driver's side, like someone had thrown it at the car. Needless to say, we were quite spooked, and the pitch-dark forest scenery wasn't helping. We decided to continue our road trip because it was getting late and we needed some rest. After we arrived at our friend's house, we made something to eat, took baths, and got ready to sleep. By then, it was 12 a.m. and we were dead tired. We decided to go for one last smoke before bed. From my friend's house, you could see most of the forest and the village even at night, especially the old church. The village still had lights on because many people would come occasionally for the weekend to relax or for holidays. Then, this is where it got really creepy. Coming from down the road, we saw a dog, or maybe a wolf, approaching. We couldn't tell since it was dark and too far away. As it got closer, we got a better look at it. It had black, long fur and was missing one ear. It just stood there, staring at us. We threw it some food, but it did nothing, just sat there staring at us for about half an hour. By then, we forgot how tired we were and just stood there watching it, except for 2 of our friends who instantly fell asleep. After 30 minutes, it barked 2 or 3 times and then left. Since the story is quite long, I can make a part 2 if you liked it. The next day was even weirder. Sorry if my English was bad. I always enjoy reading the posts here and decided to share my own story. Here are your stories with improved punctuation, grammar, and minor readability adjustments. Story 4, College Secret Society. At my university, there's a castle just off campus that is home to a secret society. The secret society goes back to the 1800s, and obviously, everything they do is kept under serious wraps. On Halloween a couple of years ago, some friends and I went to this castle because we thought it would be fun to go by the creepy castle on Halloween. I had done some research beforehand on the secret society, and there were many articles tying them to demonic and weird stuff, so I thought it would be perfect for Halloween. Anyway, the road to the castle is at the end of a residential street, and you have to walk on a gravel path into the woods to get to it. As we were walking up to the castle, we heard a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. At that moment, we all ran back to the residential road. Most of the people we were with decided to head back to campus because they were seriously freaked out, but a few of us stayed. We walked back over to the castle, and this time, we noticed people standing on top of the castle wearing black hooded robes. Once we noticed them, they immediately started throwing rocks at us. At that point, we decided to leave, but as we made our way down the path, we heard what sounded like Latin chanting coming from the castle. When we got back to the actual road, we saw some other students who had come from the woods behind the castle. They mentioned that they also heard the woman scream and were just as freaked out as us. As we were talking, we suddenly heard the sound of a little boy yelling, "Help," followed by, "Someone, please help." It was coming from the direction of the castle, so we decided to go back because, obviously, this kid needed help. When we got there, we noticed that the number of hooded figures had doubled, and they were all staring at us from the roof of the castle. We stood there for a few minutes just staring back, but then we decided it was best to leave because they had already shown hostility. This experience honestly shook me, but I thought, maybe it's just a Halloween prank. But the more I thought about it, the less sure I became. We were out there for about 2 hours, and our group and the other group of students were the only ones out there the whole time. Why would they come up with such an elaborate scheme for only 10 people? And how could I explain the screaming woman and the kid if it was just a prank? I know it sounds far-fetched, but I think something real happened that night. There's more I could share, and other strange things happened too, but I'm curious, do y'all think I'm crazy for believing that it could have been more than just a Halloween prank? Could this have been some kind of sacrifice or demonic ritual? Story 5. The time I almost died walking home late at night. Longish story. This was a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, and for some context, I'm 16 now, and when this happened, I was about 14 and a half. Growing up, I lived in a bad neighborhood and a rough area, so it wasn't safe for someone my age to be walking around alone, especially at night. This takes place after school. I had just gotten out one day, and I normally would take the bus home, but that day I decided I wanted to hang out with some friends instead. My school had a park and a corner store pretty close by, so we went to the corner store after school and then headed to the park to play basketball because one of my friends had brought a ball. We played for a few hours, and before we knew it, it was dark outside, around 7 to 8 p.m., but we weren't too worried because we didn't have school the next day, being Friday, and most of us had a ride home, except for me. I waited around until everyone had gotten picked up and gone home, then I decided to start walking home. My house was about 30 minutes away from the park, so it was a long walk. About 10 to 15 minutes into it, I started feeling uneasy. I had that feeling like someone was staring at me. I hoped I was wrong and that it was just nerves, but when I checked over my shoulder, I noticed a tall, older man following me. I was terrified and didn't know what to do, so I kept walking, pretending not to notice him. At some point, I heard him speed up, walking faster. Eventually, he started running toward me, so I bolted as fast as I could. He caught up to me and tackled me to the ground. He had a knife and tried to stab me in the face, but I blocked him with my arm to defend myself. Thankfully, a man saw what was happening and chased the guy away. He called 911 and checked on me. The guy had cut me pretty badly in the arm, slicing through everything inside. I was bleeding heavily, but thankfully, the ambulance arrived in time to save me, and I was okay. Now, I'm terrified to walk alone at night, so I carry a knife on me just in case. After this incident, I moved to a different state and a safer area. Even now, I have absolutely no idea why this guy attacked me. He didn't try to rob me or kidnap me, he just assaulted me. It's always bothered me, not knowing why he did what he did to me. I have photo evidence of what happened and will be posting those photos with this post. Story 6. Did I meet the devil? Okay, so I'm not sure exactly where to go with this. Let's start with some backstory. I was probably 5 to 8 years old. My dad installed glass in cars at a place called Don's Auto Glass in Manteca, California. I remember after school, my mom took me to see him while he worked since it wasn't an issue for his boss, and I enjoyed going. My parents were both talking, so being the ADHD child I was, I decided to catch the horsefly in the building. After successfully catching it with a foam water cup from the Ice Mountain water dispenser, I took it outside. There was an older fellow walking down the street. Now, for Manteca, it's a small town, so this is where it starts getting weird. At this time, it wasn't a dead town, it was busy all day, but this man was the only one around at about 3 to 4:30 p.m. No one else was walking, no cars were driving by, not even a bird was in sight. I know, big imagination, right? This fellow comes up to me and starts asking me questions, starting a conversation. After a minute of innocent questions and childlike responses from yours truly, he opens his jacket, a black leather coat with 4 pockets, 2 outside and 2 inside, long past his waist, black hat, gray eyebrows, no facial hair, probably 65 to 70 years old, and an innocent but menacing look like empty eyes. He pulls out a bedtime stories book with a bear and a moon on the cover, dark blue, with gold-edged pages. Nothing odd about it, except for his words, "I have a gift for you," in a tone like he knew me. Now, for a kid my age, I thought, cool, a gift. But after that, I just remember my mom coming outside and thanking him oddly fast, then ushering me inside. Obviously, my mom had no clue. She probably just thought he was a creep. This is all over the place, but it's all I remember. Funny thing is, I have every book from my childhood, and I can still picture this one. It's the only one missing, and I never even read it, by the way. Recently, I've been thinking over this memory every night or every few days at random moments, and it's seriously making me think I'm insane because I know it wasn't the devil, but something was off about him, not in a creepy or pervy way, but in a sinister way. His hands were long, his smile was evil. Why were the streets empty in the middle of the day in Manteca? I live in MS now and am 22, but I've never told anyone about this, except my family, obviously. Even my mom doesn't remember it. It's not like I'm afraid of it. I've always had a fascination with meeting the devil or God themselves, but that one memory haunts me each time I recall it, like, you met me already. And it doesn't help that I witnessed a family get killed by a train around the same age, which I also remember pretty vividly. Just wild to think about, you know?